Hi, I'm Old Sneelock. Welcome to another episode of Old Sneelock's Workshop. Throughout my life, I've been fixing things. Started out early, wanted a go-kart, needed to fix an engine so that the engine would run to push the go-kart, needed to make all the bits and pieces and parts. Now, I didn't do this because I was 11, but my neighbor helped me and we built a go-kart, mostly because he had a go-kart and he wanted to have somebody to ride it go-karts with him, and I was willing to do it. So then we had the beginning of a business. It wasn't really a business at the time because I didn't think of it as a business. I already had a business. I was fixing lawnmowers and mowing yards. That's what I did. Made about $40 a week, which is not bad for an 11-year-old kid. And let's see, that would be 1961. It's only a summertime job, but in the summer you can make a lot of money. So I had money to burn and things to spend it on. So I would buy junk. Well, not really junk. You could call it junk. I traded the go-kart for a motorcycle. A 1946 Harley Davidson 45 cubic inch flathead. Wes Morick had it and wanted to have my go-kart because I had been telling him about my go-kart in English class. Well, turns out Wes had this 45 in pieces. I mean, literally in pieces. We brought it home in, on, and around a Volkswagen Beetle. Yeah, it was boxes, and he'd taken everything apart, thinking he was going to turn it into a chopper. Well, when you're 15, your mind has more reach than your hands can fulfill. So Wes ended up with a go-kart. Okay, I had Harley. And I told my dad, "Oh no, Dad, I'm not going to ride motorcycles. I'm fixing this up to be a go-kart engine." Well, I actually had that idea in the beginning. I made a little model of a go-kart using a tricycle frame, 2 front wheels, 1 rear wheel, and using the Harley and having the Harley and the transmission, so I had 3 speeds forward, and it was going to be cool. Didn't happen. In order to get the engine running, we needed to put it into something. So we set it in the frame. And of course you have to have the wheels on it to support everything, so we put the wheels on it. And as we kept going, it was like playing with a puzzle. We had this box of pieces. Many bolts, screws, washers, nuts, transmission, chains, clutches, cables, linkages, just all kinds of stuff. So we put the engine together and we tried starting it, and it wouldn't start. Well, we didn't have any idea what we were doing with a Harley engine. We'd never worked on one before. Now, my neighbor was about 25 at the time, so I was about, well, like I said, 15. Wes was 15 and I was 15. We were both in the same class. So my neighbor and I worked very hard on the engine. And then I discovered something. You can find stuff out if you go and ask the right people. Now, Harley is very fussy. Well, they were. They didn't like choppers. They didn't like anybody messing with their engines and doing anything other than making it box stock. I mean, saddlebags, fenders, and lots of lights, right? So when I went up to balance Harley Davidson in Battle Creek, they were a little reticent about telling me much about the motorcycle. It's odd because, would think, well, we'll sell you parts. Because I had money. Remember, I made money during the summer, and I had money. And by then I was working for Merle Warner, and delivering washers and refrigerators and freezers and you name it, appliances. 3rd floor apartments, walk up, outside stairway. Me and Darren Robarge. But anyways, back to the story. So I went to Balance Harley Davidson and I said, I need some information on this motorcycle. Well, they didn't have anything. They did. They had these huge books, every single detail on a Harley 45, because Harley never threw away anything. They might use it later. So I got a brochure. Yeah, a brochure on a Harley 45. Now, there wasn't any internet back then. I couldn't look things up. I went to the library and they had nothing. So this little brochure was all I had. And it showed the basic working parts of the engine. And the thing that we found was there's an oil pump that pumps oil through the engine. And it is timed to the camshaft. And if you don't have that timed correctly, it doesn't vent the crankcase. So what I was doing was I was shutting off the vent on the crankcase when the piston was coming down, so it just wouldn't turn over. Okay, we got that. Put that back in right and got that lined up, and everything was supposedly good. I kick-started it, nearly threw me over the handlebars. Seems there's a timing issue. The Harley has an advance on the distributor. Well, it's not a distributor, it's just points. It's timing for the points and spark. And I had it out of position. Didn't know where it went. I had it backwards. So we put it where it belonged, and then the engine would actually start. Well, now I got a running engine, and I've got it mounted in the frame, and everything works. So I now had a Harley 45 that I could drive, and I spent a lot of time playing with it and climbing hills with it and running around doing things you're not supposed to do when you're 15. But then I got away with it. Now, all that experience working on motorcycles and working on cars, trucks, and everything else, it was always on something that was broken when it started, because I bought things broken. It was fun to fix them. One of my favorite things to work on was a truck that I gave my son. Now, my brother-in-law, Abel, had a neighbor with an S10 parked out in the woods. Just parked out in the woods. And Abel called me up and said, Dave, would Ryan want a truck? Now, Ryan was old enough to drive. He was 16. And I said, well, let's see. So I went over and looked at it, and we pulled it out of the woods. It was infested with all kinds of greenery. It had vines growing in it everywhere. And, animals had chewed on it. But we pulled it out of the woods backwards with the truck, with my truck, and I rented a dolly and pulled it home. We parked it in the barn. Well, that weekend we got the truck out, and I pulled out the toolboxes and all the test equipment and everything else that I had, and we started trying to get the engine to run, because kind of like the Harley, the first thing you got to do is get the engine to run. So I could get it to fire if I poured gas into the intake. It was a fuel injected engine, and I think they call it the Iron Duke. Somebody once told me that the Iron Duke was nearly bulletproof. We'll get to that later. Anyways, it would fire, but it wouldn't run. So I began checking things, and the S10 had a computerized control system on it, you know, the black box. And the black box meant that I couldn't trace anything. I couldn't find out where wires went or how they worked, other than it came from here and went to the black box. Okay, where did it come out of the black box? We don't know. But I kept tracking and tracking and tracking and trying to find out why it wasn't running. Finally, we figured out that it would run for just a short period of time and then it would quit. And I realized that I would get a signal to the fuel pump for 3 seconds. That's all it would give me. Now it turns out that's a safety feature on the S10. If something happens to the circuit and it grounds out, the fuel pump may have a hole in the hose. You don't want fuel spraying all over the place, so it'll run for 3 seconds and then quit. If it doesn't build pressure in that 3 seconds, it quits and it won't start. Fuel pump won't start. So, okay, now I understand. The fuel pump wasn't building pressure. So I started checking and the hoses were fine and it would spray and it put fuel into the carburetor. There wasn't any leaks. Well, carburetor, fuel injection system. It put fuel in the fuel injection system. There wasn't any leaks, but it still shut off. It still shut off. So I kept looking at it and looking at it and looking at it and finally figured out, okay, I know what the problem is. It's lost the ground to the fuel pump on the fuel tank. Chipmunks, mice, squirrels, rats, whatever other little rodents that chew on wires had gotten in and built a nest on top of the fuel tank. And the fuel pump sits on top of the fuel tank. So now I had a truck that didn't have a ground to the fuel pump, so the fuel pump wasn't kicking on. Well, how did I get fuel? Well, I don't know. The pump was running, but it only ran for 3 seconds. Not sure why. Anyways, so we pulled off the box because you had to pull off the box to get to the fuel tank because the truck was sitting in the garage in the barn and it was so low to the ground I couldn't get under it. I tried pulling the tank out from under the truck, but the truck was so low to the ground I couldn't get the tank out. So we pulled the box off and we were able to lift the tank and the cover for the fuel pump off, find the broken wire, a little black wire about that long that had been chewed in half, connected that. All of a sudden everything's ready to go. It's pumping fuel, the fuel injection system's working, it cranks over, it fires, it starts. I got a running truck. Okay, so we spent a little time on that, Ryan and I, together, and get the truck running, fix it all up so that he can drive it. It's still pretty ugly. I mean, it looks like it's had leprosy because paint's coming off of it. It's been painted 5 different colors. And somebody decided to put a cooler in the back of the truck, so they installed this foam box and covered it with what do they call that? Great stuff, you know, the polyurethane foam insulation. So it was all over everything. But the truck ran. So Ryan got a license and we put the truck on the road and he was driving it back and forth to school. Ugly truck. Ugly truck. But it ran. And when you're 16 in Union City and you got a truck, doesn't matter what it looks like. It's cool. So now Ryan had a truck and he could drive it. And he went for a camp with the church. They were going to be going away for a week, headed out to the West Coast to visit somebody. And Pastor Dodge and the kids all got together and got on a plane and went. Ryan was going to be gone for a week. So I took the truck and pulled it out of the garage, stripped it down, sanded it, bumped out the big dents, patched up the running boards where the running boards had holes in them, hammered out the hood, got everything working, sanded it down, painted it. Ford gray, because I had bought a gallon of Ford gray when I was painting the truck and painting the Jeep or painting the tractor and painting everything. So I had a gallon of Ford gray. So we painted the truck Ford gray. When he came home, it looked amazing. Now, if you didn't look in the box still had some kind of gunky stuff in it, and Ryan had taken the headliner out, so it didn't have a headliner. But it looked nice from the outside. When he came home, drove it to school the next day, everybody said, "Wow, did you get a new truck?" I was proud. I thought, this is really cool. His mom and I worked on it really hard, got it all done, and he was very happy with it. There's one problem with the truck. It didn't really want to shift into second gear. It had an automatic transmission, and when you started out in first gear, it would just stay in first. It wouldn't shift up into second. You had to let off on the gas, and then accelerate again, and it would shift into second. So it was working, right? It did what it was supposed to do. Well, Ryan was getting ready to go to school, and it was about a week after we painted the truck. I'd been gone to work because I was working in where was I working? Let's see, Ryan's 15, 86, so that would be 96. I would have been at Autotech. And Ryan went to go to school, pulled out on the road, accelerated, and it was in first gear and it wouldn't shift into second. So rather than letting off on the gas, he just floored it. Well, turns out the Iron Duke is not bulletproof. He stuck a rod through the side of the block. Now, I'm a patient man, and I love my son. So when I got home, they were kind of reticent to tell me what had happened. The truck was sitting in the driveway. His mom had taken her Honda CR-V, and they hooked a rope to the truck and pulled it into the driveway, and there it sat. And I came home, and they're looking at me like something bad happened. And I said, "What happened?" "Well, the truck won't run." "Oh, okay, what happened to it?" "Well, it wouldn't shift, and then it went boom." "Oh, goodness." So I go to get a flashlight, walk around to the front of the barn, over to where the tools are. And as I'm walking back with the flashlight in my hands, I hear clank, 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 and then an engine starts. And it sounds terrible. I mean, it sounds like it's coming apart. And I take off running and come around the side of the garage, or around the side of the barn, and tell Ryan, "Shut it off! Shut it off!" When you have an engine with a blown rod, it is flailing around inside the crankcase. And, you know, it's a dynamited casting. You don't really know what's going on in there other than you've got fire and gasoline and oil, combustible items, and you've got this rod knocking things around inside the engine compartment. You don't want to do that. You want to shut it off because it'll catch fire. I don't know that it'll necessarily explode, but you really don't want to set the truck on fire, because I'm thinking it's still possibly repairable. New engine. Okay, we've done that kind of thing before. Remember the Harley? Take everything all apart, put it back together again. Well, then I hear the story about how it blew up, and I'm thinking, you need a lesson. You need a lesson that this isn't the way you do things. You don't just floor it. So I said, well, I guess you're out of a truck. You don't have a truck anymore. This one will never run again. I'm not going to put an engine in it. Nope. So Ryan's upset, but he decides he's going to sell the truck on eBay. And I'm thinking, well, this will go over like a lead balloon. Who's going to buy an S10 with a bad transmission and a bad engine? Well, it turns out the truck that he bought for nothing, it was given to us. We put a new windshield in it. I spent some time on it, put some paint in it, a little bit of Bondo, a lot of hammer work. He sold it for $485 to somebody from Wisconsin whose daughter had an S10 that was rotted out, because S10s rot out. And he had a good engine and a good transmission, and he just needed a body to put it in. So he came over, picked up the truck, and drove home. Ryan was just ecstatic because he got nearly $500 for his truck. So he and his mom went out and bought him a new truck for $5,000. Mom co-signed for it. I was okay with that. I didn't mind co-signing for a new truck. Hopefully he got the lesson right. But that S10, we spent an inordinate amount of time on it, fixed it up, and blew it up. That's pretty much the whole deal in my life. You find something, or you work for somebody, you go into a plant that you've never seen before, and they say, well, this is my major problem. And you go fix their major problem. And first thing they do is screw it up. Midwest Foundry, LS Products, Borg Warner, United Technologies, Metal Powder Components, Douglas Corporation, Douglas Autotech, no relation, and then Product Action, and then Demmer. A lot of places. Every one of them pretty much same story. But it's been interesting. And that's how I learned that you can fix nearly anything, but it ain't gonna last. If you have any suggestions for a new video, questions about today's video, or any of the other videos on the channel, just drop a note in the comments. You know I read them all. Thanks for watching.
This video is not to be viewed by anyone under the age of 13 in the U.S. or 16 in the European Union, without the express written permission of the parents or legal guardians of the underage person. Such written permission must be on file at the local government entity in charge of enforcing the rules and regulations established by the FTC. Anyone violating these terms is admitting by default that they hold harmless the owners and operators of this channel. Any and all questions should be addressed to your local branch of the FTC.